Howdy, y'all. Today I got some questions from Jordan DeJong. Philosopher's Coffee. Philosophy, sponsored by dopamine. Alright, now these look like there's some long questions, so we're gonna get right into it here. Okay. Question 1. How would you define work? What makes something to be work? And against what sort of activity or nature ought it to be contrasted? For example, either rest or fulfillment. And what is the proper relationship between the artist and work? So I realize this might not exactly be the philosophical answer you're looking for, but one way that I tend to demark work is to think of what kinds of activities require strain. For example, I think most of the time reading for me is pretty passive, and certainly watching YouTube videos is passive for me. And with those activities, I don't consider those work. Now, maybe if you were reading more than you wanted to, then it would become work. So, but there's a level of strain that's reached where it feels as if you're not just following the most natural path. On the other hand, in our society, we have a pretty specific conception of work. I mean, it means getting a job. So it might be difficult for you to do push-ups, but we would say that's not work. Work is where you're getting money. And that's, I think, a useful social distinction too. It says that there's a kind of work that we're very interested in, which is related to our survival. And so I guess maybe between these two concepts of survival and strain, we can find a workable conception of what work is. So here's this other question. What is the proper relationship between the artist and work? Well, I guess going back to what we were just saying, I think part of an artist's job is always to pursue strain. I certainly don't think that an artist is just supposed to be having fun all the time. I think they get to have maybe more fun than other people, but there's some element of their practice which is labor intensive. I think if I had it my way, artists would not have to work in the seeking survival sense. I wish that there was more of a sensibility that not everyone in society had to be a businessman of one sort or another. I think the artist has something special to say that normal ideas of labor and utility don't get at. And I wish that we had more of a place for that, sort of like in the first video I put out on this channel about the oppression of the artist. Okay, next question. Is there any place for thinking that we get the lover we deserve, or that we are called to become worthy of the lover we desire? Can a lover we do not even know yet help us become better or deserving of them? Or does this idea foster the pedestal mentality, the idealization of the lover/beloved? Can you be unworthy of love you are receiving? Well, let me start. I think that oftentimes before people go and seek out love, they first experience a period of growth. I almost just want to say yes and no to all of these. I think at the heart of this, you're wondering about what objective merit might be related to being in love and all aspects of that. So whether or not you're worthy because you're good enough, whether or not you're going to become good enough to be worthy, whether or not your lover is pulling you towards something better, whether or not all of that's wrong and it should just be, what do they call it? Unconditional love. I think that there's something both very true in the idea that our lover brings out the best in us, or can bring out the best in us, or that as we're gearing up to go on dates or whatever, that we're working on ourselves more perhaps. But I resist the way in which that can make it appear as if the purpose of your love is about your own improvement and your own merit. I think that the deepest side of love is much more mysterious than that. I always do my best to resist being a therapist to my partner, or to try to make the relationship too quality centric. I don't believe that a relationship is at the highest level I don't believe that it's an improvement project. I think probably what's most meritable about a relationship is more like what you could think of as a parent's love or God's love, where somehow the other person is loved despite their flaws. And I'm not I'm not trying to say don't find a good partner and don't be a good partner and be better and the best that you can for the other person. I just don't see a relationship as being the place where self-improvement is the pinnacle. There's something much better than self-improvement to be found in a relationship. Okay, next question. Is one form of art essentially more private or personal than the others? It's interesting you ask this. I just realized, I took a long time not reading almost any novels, and then I took a long time hardly reading any poetry. And recently I've come back to them both with sort of with some distinct senses of what it is that they do best, which wasn't so clear to me. With all of the new media, I think we're trying to reapprehend what the old arts may still be good at, if anything. So I think with poetry, the sense that I got is that there's an emotional nourishment in poetry that I don't think you find in any other art. I think with songs, you get a clear sense of emotional catharsis, but there's a kind of nourishment in poetry that you can get, or like a filling up, or a revitalization. It's almost like your arteries are being cleared out, your emotional arteries are being cleared out. And you walk away from reading a good poem, I think, feeling fuller rather than feeling expressed. It's not like having a soundtrack to your life. I think this is because poetry has more space in it. Okay, well, to answer the question straightly, yeah, I think poetry is the most private. It's like a love letter from the poet's heart. But because there's that space in it, unlike in a song or a movie, you have space where you get to commune with the poet somehow. The sense of emotional touch is most present. It's hard for me to go into all the details of this. I expect that it maybe somehow has to do with language being a symbolic signifier rather than a surface. Like music and painting and film all have the quality of being very well done surfaces. I'm not saying they don't have depth, but quite literally what they are is something which is sensorially received. With words, there's something less intensive being done. And with a novel, I think a novel is private in its own way. Like, I think what it does that I haven't seen in another art is when you're reading, you get a dreaminess, you get a dreamy engulfment of being in another world, and it feels like the hours can just pass and pass. In both poetry and in novels, I think there's a kind of patience that you get. And again, I think this has to do with the word as being a signifier rather than a surface. And so to read a novel is a very full expression of an author. Now, I think maybe I would say poetry feels more private to me because the expression actually tends to be more straightforward and less objectified. Okay, next question. What is motivation? What role should the concept of fulfillment play in my life? Is it possible to overvalue or undervalue fulfillment? Fulfillment is one of those tricky concepts like happiness, where maybe the more that you want it, the harder it is to get. I think fulfillment comes from a sense of wholeness and is distinct from perfection, which is more like an arrow tip. For example, there are many pop stars, not to mention all of the artists and philosophers who are completely neurotic, who I think really sought perfection their whole life, or sought fame their whole life, and felt very little fulfillment. Fulfillment comes from a process of evening out. It's like acknowledging that the whole human range is yours, rather than just the attitudes that you identify yourself with at the time. I think you can find this idea most clearly presented in psychological integration work. I guess at the epicenter of that, I see Carl Jung, where the idea is that you're somehow playing a negotiator between all of the different parts of yourself, and you're making sure that they all get their fill. But of course, we can be greedy just like we can be greedy for sex or food or goodness. And of course, there will come a point at which to be fulfilled means that you give up on being fulfilled. And so that's the whole damn game of it, isn't it? I was talking about not reading poems and not reading novels for a long time earlier, and that's because I think one of the clearest ways to come to an understanding of what a thing is to cut it out of your diet entirely. Knowing always takes you to the place where the only way to continue knowing is to stop. And you give up your entire arsenal and you wait to see if it comes back to you. And if it does, and it almost always does, it comes back to you in a way where the duality is dispersed and you don't ask questions like, should I be fulfilled or not fulfilled? Well, you still do ask those questions. You just are wiser to how stupid you're being. Okay. I appreciate the questions, Jordan. Take care, everyone. If you want more of these answers to questions, hit me up in the comments below and I'll make a video to respond. All right. Take care, y'all. Bye-bye.